I had always found peace in solitude. That's why, on a cool autumn evening, I packed my backpack and headed into the dense forest near my town. It was a place I had explored many times before, but something about that night felt different. I set up my tent near a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. As night fell, I sat by the fire, listening to the distant hoots of owls and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth. The forest was alive, but it was a comforting presence, at least at first. Sometime around midnight, just as I was dozing off inside my tent, I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind weaving through the trees, but the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone was speaking just outside my tent in a hushed, raspy voice. I held my breath, straining to hear. Then came the sound of footsteps, not the light scurrying of an animal. These were slow, deliberate steps circling my tent. My blood ran cold. I reached for my flashlight and, summoning what little courage I had, unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows on the trees. But I saw no one. The footsteps had stopped the moment I moved. I convinced myself it was paranoia. The forest could play tricks on the mind. Perhaps a branch had fallen, or an animal had passed by. I zipped up my tent and forced myself to lie back down. Then the whispering started again. This time, it was closer. My breath caught in my throat as the voice spoke directly behind me, mere inches from the thin fabric of my tent. The words were unintelligible, but there was something inherently wrong about them, something that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my knife, my only real protection, and slowly unzipped the tent, stepping out with the flashlight aimed forward. The forest was silent, too silent. No crickets, no owls, just the deafening absence of life. I swept my flashlight around, my hands trembling. My heart pounded against my ribs, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Then I saw them, footprints. They circled my tent, large, deep imprints in the damp soil, but there was something horribly wrong with them. They weren't human. The toes were elongated, unnatural. Each step seemed too far apart, as if whatever had made them moved in long, gliding strides. And worse yet, the trail didn't lead away. It stopped directly behind my tent, where I had heard the whisper. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, knife raised, but there was nothing there, just the towering trees and the suffocating darkness between them. That was it. I wasn't staying another second. I packed up my things in a frenzied panic, shoving everything into my backpack with shaking hands. I didn't care if I left anything behind. I just needed to get out. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the trail, my heart pounding with every step. But the forest had changed. The path I had taken earlier looked different. The trees seemed taller, their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out the moonlight. I walked faster, trying to retrace my steps, but the deeper I went, the more lost I felt. Then, ahead of me, something moved, a shadow. Tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadow stood motionless in the middle of the path, its form barely distinguishable in the dim light. Then it whispered my name. I didn't think. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. The whispering followed me, growing louder, more urgent. I could feel it behind me, closing the distance with inhuman speed. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I pushed forward until, at last, I saw the glimmer of my car's headlights through the trees. I lunged for the door, fumbling with the keys. Just as I yanked it open, I felt something brush against my back. Cold, skeletal fingers grazing my skin. I threw myself inside, locking the doors and starting the engine in one frantic motion. My headlights illuminated the path ahead, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no shadow. Just the empty forest, still and quiet as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back. I floored the gas pedal and didn't stop until I reached my house, slamming the door behind me. Even in the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it one last time. A whisper, right outside my window.